Hey everyone, it's Mr. Spooky. If you want to skip this monologue, the time is on screen. First of all, sorry about the small gap in time between the last time I spoke to all of you. I tried to do a whole lot a little too soon after I thought things regarding my health were fixed. Anyway, I decided to just wait a little while longer to give the medicine more time to work, and so far, everything's been good. For the last couple of days, I've been able to read all I want and it sounds great. So I will finish the batch of re-uploads I was planning to get out about 10 days ago. I know I said I would get it all done in one day, but because of how things went, I delayed it. I'm sorry if you hate the re-uploads, these are the last of them. Anyway, a lot of my previously demonetized videos, which I privated, seem to be monetizable now. I really don't know what happened, and I doubt I'll ever get an answer as to how it happened. Maybe they got fixed because they're so old, or maybe because I re-uploaded them. Anyway, I will be putting a lot of my old videos back up as they were. I will post the same long comment as I did previously, just so anyone who hasn't seen it can. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you soon.
Okay, so this happened to me about 7 years ago when I had just started high school. The school I was at was about a 10-minute walk from my little brother's school, so every day I would walk up to meet him. It was a pretty safe walk along a main road with lots of sunlight and cars, but not many people most of the time. Occasionally you would get some other school children or some runners and some old people walking in their apartments, and of course the people waiting at the bus stops. The bus stop was about halfway between my school and my little brother's, and there were only ever about 2 people waiting there. One afternoon I was walking up to meet my brother and had left my earphones at home that day so I couldn't listen to music while walking. So I was just walking and enjoying the sun and the pretty plants in the gardens. When I reached the bus stop, then I noticed an old man sitting on the bench, waiting for a bus. I passed him and didn't think much of it because he seemed harmless. I'd say this guy was around 60 to 65 years old. He was pretty short and not very fit. As soon as I walked past him, I heard him get up. I didn't see a bus coming. Maybe he was checking the timetable. But no, of course not. I turned my head around to check on this guy, and he is like 5 steps behind me with his eyes stuck on me. I started to speed walk, but then I heard him speed up too. I looked behind me, and sure enough, he's speed walking as well. I was scared. He hadn't taken his eyes off me, and now whenever I looked back, he had given me this creepy, devilish grin. There was nobody else around, and I was about 200 meters from my brother's school. I decided to bolt it. I looked behind me, and the old guy was running. I couldn't believe it. He was faster than I could have ever expected. Every time I looked behind me, he was staring at me and smiling. I was almost in tears. I was so scared. I wasn't going to make it. Now I know what you're thinking. How could a young teenage girl not outrun a man in his 60s? But I was carrying a 40-pound school bag and my knee had been messed up from gymnastics. I was in no shape for running. By this point I could see my brother's school and some kids leaving. I was kinda relieved and I thought the old man would ease up and notice people that other people were around. But no. What does this guy do? He starts yelling to people saying, "My granddaughter, she's running away from me. Get her, she's in trouble." I then stopped because I had come up to a massive road and didn't want to get hit by a car. The guy came speeding behind me, almost close enough to grab my bag, and he whispered to me, "Stop being such a little cunt," and that he was going to win and take me away. I screamed and ran for my life, not caring about the cars. I got into my little brother's school and looked back to see the guy jogging towards me. I ran into the main building and told the receptionist what had happened. She had to look outside and pointed to a man waiting outside of the school gate, moving his head around as if he was trying to spot someone. It was him, and she told me to wait here while she was calling the police. The man walked away after about 10 minutes, but the police did catch him, and we found out that he had been offering candy to kids from my brother's school and trying to get them to come over with him in the afternoons. I walked on the other side of the road from then on, avoiding the bus stop and anyone I passed. So crazy old bus stop man, let's not meet. This happened to me when I was really young. I was only about 8 or 9 at the time. Now, here's a bit of backstory to this. When I was younger, way up until when I was in middle school, I was a total grandma's baby. I was constantly at my grandma's. My grandparents weren't really that old at the time. They were in about their 50s or 60s. They really liked to go out and travel, so I would go over there and stay out all the time. I was over at my grandparents more than I was at my own parents' house. My grandmother constantly babied me, so I had never actually gotten talks about the real world. I was just generally a stupid, naive child. It all started when my grandpa wanted to go camping. My grandma was totally for it. This would have been the first time they could take me that I could actually remember. And they weren't quite too old yet, so they didn't really have any trouble sleeping on the ground. They had convinced my aunt and uncle to come with us, My parents couldn't come though. My dad had to go to work and my mom didn't want to go. We went to a relatively close campsite, maybe 20 minutes away from where my grandparents had lived. It was a popular place. They had RV hookups, places and everything. The river was just over the side of the campground. They generally let me wander around while they got everything ready, set up the tents, got the cooler out of the truck, made the campsite nice out for the week to stay. They let me generally wander around as they got everything ready. They set up the tent, they got the cooler out of the truck and made the campsite nice for the week's stay. It must have rained there not too long before because I was drawn to some large puddles near the edge of the site, right next to the road. Now, I wasn't a very messy child, but I rather wanted to be. So I would crouch right down next to the edge of the puddle and toss a bit of pebbles into it, watching the ripples. Growing bored pretty quickly, I looked around at my surroundings and noticed a man. Reflecting back, he was probably about 23 or 27 years old. He walked towards me. He must have noticed my gaze because he smiled and waved, waiting until he was about 10 feet to actually speak and address me. I don't remember the exact details. Like I said, I was no older than 9 years old, but I remember him saying hello. I think he may have offered a name, but I'm not sure. The man greeted me with a rather friendly smile and asked me if I wanted to play with him. And he asked me again, "Don't you have any toys?" He obviously noted the lack of items that I had. I told him that I did, but they're all in my car, and that I was only allowed to bring 2. He made a face saying, "That's no fun." And then he said, "I have lots of toys." He asked me if I had liked dolls. I had said that I do love dolls. My grandma gets a lot of them. He gave me this sort of conspiracy smile, and had asked if I wanted to see his dolls at his house. He had a whole room of them apparently. At the time, all I could think of was his image of this man playing with babies' dolls. And then I screamed, "No you don't! You're an adult! Adults don't play with toys!" He smiled back at me, making some gestures with his hands and said, "Yes I do. I like to play with dolls. And I have a bunch I can show you. We could play together." I had only ever been to my grandparents' house and my parents' house by this time, not a cousin's nor any school friends, so I had no intentions of going with this man. But I was, oddly enough, happy to talk to him. And then I said in a playful tone, "No you don't, you're lying." He grinned back at me, maybe getting a step closer, and he said, "I'm not. I can show you." The thought just tickled me to death, and even the fact that he wanted to play with a little kid like me, I thought was funny. Again I said out loud, "You're a liar. Why would any adults play with dolls?" He came off by saying, "Adults like to play too," and again told me that he would show me his collection of dolls. This is when my aunt called my name, telling me to get over there right now, asking about what the guy was wanting. I of course told him that he wanted to show me his doll collection. The guy must have been scared off because I clearly remember my aunt and grandma sitting me down as my grandpa and uncle went over to talk to him. This was the first time I'd ever been giving the "don't talk to strangers" talk. I never saw this guy again. I don't even know if my parents were ever told. We only ever stayed for 3 days at the campsite after that. None of the adults involved had ever mentioned it again, and I've never asked. I just find it interesting to think back on how stupid I was, how close I was to being kidnapped. My brother's fiancée Laura worked as a landlord for a small apartment complex in downtown Milwaukee. It was a nice neighborhood, however the apartments were a bit of a dump. She and my brother were currently going through medical school, so free vacancy was a great deal for them. She had dealt with the normal array of tenants, you know, the usual. Smelly rooms, bed bugs, being noisy past hours. However, one day she had come across a strange occurrence with a potential tenant. A lady rang her and asked if a certain room number was for rent. Laura thought it was oddly specific, but they said they did have vacancy, just not in that room. The old lady then explained that she used to live there and was hospitalized for a while back. She left her apartment lease as she thought she would be hospitalized for a while longer. Laura set up a time to look at the other apartments in the complex and hung up. She then called her manager and discussed the old lady. Hastily, the manager said to decline the visit and to turn her elsewhere, as she was asked to leave, not hospitalized, for apparently not following the rules of the complex. Apparently, her room had been stinking up the entire floor, and she hadn't even paid her rent. Laura agreed, called the woman back a week later and said that she couldn't show her any rooms due to them all being booked up. Many of the workers that helped out the landlord were inner city college kids and not the most responsible. Laura said her job was a bit like babysitting, making sure the cleaners and people that turned over the rooms would stay on track and get all the rooms ready for occupancy. So, fast forward 2 months, Laura's showing a few rooms off to some new tenants, when all of a sudden a rather large man walked out of his room and asked to speak to Laura when she had a chance. He was very calm and just said he was having issues with his room. Because Laura didn't want to scare the potential tenants, she promptly finished the tour and took the man downstairs to talk. The man had said that things in his room started to end up out of place and even appeared missing. Things like his peanut butter and jam looked as if someone had been eating them. She had assured him first off that it was not her and that no one else in the apartment complex had the keys. He then very calmly whispered, "I know it wasn't you. It's an elderly woman." She then asked, "How do you know this?" It was then she realized that it was the same room that woman had inquired about before, and about those bumbling college teenagers who flipped the rooms for the manager. They had forgotten to change the lock. The man then said twice in the last month he had woken up with the woman sitting in his chair, which was by his bedside, just watching him all night as he slept. When asked why he didn't do anything about this, he said he was too afraid and just kept pretending to sleep until at least she left. Once the lock was changed, they never saw her again. However, just the thought of waking up and having someone staring at you in the dark all night still sent shivers down my spine. This didn't happen to me, but to my mom about 4 years ago. I was about 12 and was on a 3-day-long field trip with my school, and had left Wednesday and was back on Friday. When I had come back home, my mom and brother told me this story. My mom, brother, and sister were driving back from my brother's wrestling practice that was from 7:30 to 8:30 p.m. It was about 30 minutes away from my house, so it wasn't a long drive. About 10 minutes into the drive, my mom had noticed that she was being followed by a gray car, and she had an eerie feeling, but still pushed off, as it was a very busy street and nothing really scary was happening. It had followed her until she had gotten off the road and onto a more quiet street. At this point, she started to feel weird, but she hadn't said anything, as to not freak out my little brother and sister. So she kept quiet and kept looking at the rearview mirror. It had followed them till she got onto our road, and our road didn't have any street lamps except for one that was at the end of the road. So this means that our street is very dark. So she had pulled out onto our driveway, and to my mom's horror, the car had stopped right in front of our house. My mom was a very strong woman, so she got out of the car and told my brother and sister to stay inside. A skinny, tall white man had stepped out of the car and told my mom that he was a policeman and that he would need to take her to the station and ask her some questions about her reckless driving. My mom is a very safe driver and never drinks or smokes, so she knew she wasn't recklessly driving. She told him that she didn't recall any reckless driving and wanted some proof that he was a cop, but he just kept persisting. In fact, he even said, "I'm gonna need you to bring your kids down as well." At this moment, she knew that this man was not a cop because she had never even mentioned her own children. How did he know? She kept refusing to go and told the man to leave, but then he started suddenly walking towards my mom. She was startled at this sudden movement and was frozen in fear as he came closer. Suddenly, my front door opened to my house, and my dad had stepped out. The man froze in his tracks and squinted at my dad. My dad was a big man. He was a wrestler and he boxed. The man made eye contact with my dad and started to walk back to his car. He then said to my mom, "I'll let you off with a warning this time." And he got into his car and drove away. My mom quickly rushed my brother and sister in our house and locked the door. She started to hug them and cry. My dad then told them that he had a strange gut feeling that made him want to go outside. My parents believe it was the guardian angel. When she had told me the story, one thing that had bothered me the most is that if he had known she had had kids that were driving home from practice every day of the week, this could only mean that he was stalking us and had known our daily routine. But it doesn't end there. About 2 weeks later, me and my brother were getting dropped off at our bus stop to go home. We're the only 2 kids that get off at that bus stop, and the walk home is about 3 minutes away. As we were about to get off the bus, my brother freezes and grabs me by the shoulder and stops by the window to a gray car. As we are about to get off the bus, my brother freezes and grabs me by the shoulder and points out a window to a gray car and whispers in my ear, "That's the guy that followed us." I stared and got a chill down my spine. A man was sitting in the van looking at our bus. I turned toward the bus driver and explained the situation. He then told us to go sit down in the seat right behind him and call the police. I did, and explained to the dispatcher that a man was acting suspicious. But as he wasn't doing anything, they couldn't do anything. He He then drove us directly to our house and dropped us off. Our dad was home, and we came running to him and told him that the man was back. As we said this, he told us that it was maybe just a coincidence, but then looked up and his eyes grew wide. I turned around to see the car was slowly coming down our road. But as it came in view to the house, the man looked at my dad and quickly sped away. My dad told us to quickly go inside. From that day forward, my dad picked us up and dropped us off at school every day, and my mom or dad never left us alone. We never saw the car or the man again, so creepy man who pretended to be a police officer and stalked us, let's never meet again. My story happened about 4 years ago. I was a single mom living alone, and my property is out of town a bit. Not in the middle of nowhere, but not close enough to town for walking distance either. I have a couple of neighbors that I see from time to time every day, and everyone else in my area knows pretty much everyone else. I was doing some dishes and cleaning up because my son was in bed for the night. I had let my dog outside to roam the property, and I was humming along with the radio and washing dishes. I went outside to call my dog to the house, because she usually ends up off the edges of the property, and I saw a small light in the field that I had never seen before. It looked very much like a flashlight. I was a little creeped out, so I stayed in the lights of my property, where my neighbor across the street could still see me if he looked out of his window. It had made me feel a lot safer, whether it was justified or not. I called my dog 3 times, shouting loudly because I didn't want to walk into the dark to find her. I waited a few minutes, listening for her paws thumping on the ground. I also heard a faint male voice from the direction of the light calling my dog back into the field. At this point, I could see her. She's about halfway between me and the source of the light. At this point, I'm getting freaked out, but I also have the weapons in my house and a knife on me at all times, and I'm not about to let this fucker hurt my dog or myself. I shout at the dog, "Goldie, get your little butt over here right now." At this point, she realized I was serious, and she wiggled her little ass over to me, and I rushed over into the house with her. I stayed in the house and turned the lights off so that I could see outside without people necessarily seeing me inside. I retrieved my handgun from the safe and loaded it, and kept it with me as I checked the doors and windows to make sure that they were locked. I looked out the window on the side of the house to see if the light was still there. It wasn't. About 10 minutes passed. I put a low light on in the kitchen and started doing the dishes again. This time, with my gun on the counter next to me just in case. About 30 minutes passed, and I'm just starting to reach a level of calm when I hear this very loud crash in my garage. Now, in my area, the neighbors are looking out for me. So at this point, I went into the living area and called the neighbor across the street to ask him if he would look out his front window and see if there's anyone outside near my garage. I tell him that I'm going to hit the lights in the garage and push the button in the laundry room to open the door. He agrees and seems super concerned. So I creep to the laundry room door that leads to the garage and push the button on the outside of the door. My neighbor immediately freaks the hell out. He tells me that there is a man in my garage. At this point, I'm just inside from the garage, and I have my gun in my hand, so I open the door fast. There was a man in my garage trying very hard to hide behind the side of my car. I slowly start to walk around and have my weapon aimed and ready to fire. As I walk around the car, I say, "I know you are over there. I have a loaded weapon. You're trespassing on private property. This is my residence, and if you don't leave, I will be forced to shoot you." Like a flash, this guy gets up and sprints out of my garage like a cat with his ass on fire, shouting, "I'm just a friendly neighbor." After that, I closed up the garage and checked to see if there was anything missing. There wasn't. I found the toolbox that he had accidentally knocked over that had caused the crash, and it seemed that his clumsiness had got him caught. I notified the police that there was a man who had broken into my garage. They came over, asked a few questions, and left. I heard about a guy who had got picked up for the exact same thing a few days later in a nearby area, but I'm not sure if it was him. So, stupid failed thief? Let's not meet again. Next time, I won't warn you first.